Hi everyone, my name is John Lea. I work as the Ubuntu Community Manager, and I'm delighted to be here interviewing John Lea, who's our design lead for Ubuntu. And we're going to talk about the design team, how the design process works. Obviously many of you folks out there get to see the fruits of that process, but we're going to delve into that a little bit. So first of all, John, how did you join Canonical? Tell us your history. How did you get started with all of this?
Oh, so I joined Canonical a long time ago, a bit more than 4.5 years ago now, just before we started the work on designing Unity, the original version.
And obviously, I mean, those people who have been fans of Ubuntu for a long time will have noticed that there's been a lot of change, right? If you think back to the days when we shipped GNOME, you know, GNOME Classic effectively.
When we had the brown theme colour everywhere.
The brown. And now we've got desktops, phones, tablets, TVs, toasters, fridges, anything else. You've been part and parcel of that process for a long time now. How has that changed over the years? I mean, how did we transition from what we had in those days to what we've got right now?
Well, when I started working with Ubuntu and we kicked off the Unity project, the vision always was to produce one interface that would scale across multiple form factors.
Right.
Mark set that as the direction and where the future would be, and it's quite a number of years ago, and we've been working towards this vision ever since, really. It's been quite a few iterations, and we're still on the journey.
So, I mean, you know, we always talk about convergence, and this is at the heart of what we do in Ubuntu. And one of the things I often hear from the design team is talk about patterns, right? So these are for want of a better word, from what I understand, is the Lego bricks in which we've developed the experience of Ubuntu. Could you just talk us through what those patterns are and how you get them? Because it must be hard creating design patterns that map across all of these different form factors, right?
Yeah, there's patterns, and then even before the patterns, you've got the underlying principles and values of the design. So we were really hoping with Unity, and our aim was to follow the Ubuntu spirit of creating an interface that everyone could use. We wanted an interface that suits the needs of both power users on one end, but also all the other kind of more kind of lower complexity users.
Like novice users, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And operating systems are very, very sticky. It's difficult for people to change. Once someone understands where everything works, especially for non-enthusiast users, changing is incredibly hard. So to make that possible, to go out there and capture market, and to help Ubuntu and Linux succeed as a mass market proposition, we really needed to try and design an interface that could be picked up by those beginning users, the people who aren't the enthusiasts, as well as meeting the needs of the enthusiasts at the other end.
Now, thinking about the design, we you know, a lot of focus, particularly in the last year, on app developments, right? So we have the Ubuntu SDK, we've developed ubuntu.com, we're encouraging people to build Ubuntu applications that span beyond the desktop. It's, you know, you write your application once with the Ubuntu SDK, and it can run on a phone, it can run on a tablet, it can run on a desktop. So it seems like the design process is divided into two areas, right? There is the shell, there is Unity, but then there is also application design. How have those patterns differed in those two different areas?
So application. So we have patterns across all areas, but in applications is where the patterns really come to the fore. Because it's important to have the patterns, so we have that experience, that consistency of experience for users. So when users learn how to use an Ubuntu, a Unity application, and then they switch to another Unity application, they know where, you know, they know where the different functions are, they know where to look. And there's consistency, which really helps the learning. Across the different form factors, so recently we've been focusing a lot on touch-centric devices, so on the phone and tablet, but now we're starting to see how we can bring those patterns over to the desktop as well.
Right.
I think one general trend in computing is the bandwidth with which people interact with computers is growing wider. If we go back many years, keyboard was the the kind of primary input device. And then we added a mouse, but because we added a mouse, that didn't remove the keyboard.
Right.
And then, you know, more recently we've got touch, so we're adding touch. I don't think touch in a desktop experience is going to replace the keyboard and the mouse, but it's complementary.
Right, right.
And then going further forward into the future, speech recognition will get really nailed at some point, and then that's going to be complementary as well. So the bandwidth with which we can interact with computers and the more natural way in which humans can interact with computers is increasing. So our strategy for convergence of patterns across touch-centric devices and pointer-centric devices is really to say touch-centric or pointer-centric. That's not saying it's exclusively touch or exclusively pointer.
Right.
And to look at how we can adapt patterns on those different.
It seems like that's a really subtle point, right? In the sense of we have this. Obviously, you have, for example, a phone, and that's an entirely touch-based device. But then some people use keyboards with tablets, for example, and then we're seeing a growing number of laptops and screens that are both, you've got a keyboard and a pointer attached, and you can also use touch as well. So the plan here, from what I understand, is that the platform should adjust. So app developers can articulate what the way they want their apps to work, but the platform should do as much of the work as possible to adapt to those different circumstances. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. And also on the blurring of lines, if we step back from kind of what's a tablet or what's a desktop, and we look at the use cases. For someone who's doing basic use cases, and browsing the web, sending some emails, making calls on Skype, playing some games, maybe if in the future if they have a 27-inch multi-touch screen and a keyboard and mouse, maybe the tablet interface will be more effective for them.
Right.
There's a lot of complexity they don't need. Then for people who are doing heavy content creation, people who are doing 3D modeling, video editing, those types of things, they need the full richness of the desktop and the multitasking experience.
Right, gotcha. Now, one of the things I often hear from the design team, we have the design clinics, we have participation from the design team at UDS, things like that, is that designs go through a thorough level of testing. So, you know, we see things either in versions of Ubuntu, or we see proposed ideas for design, and then we're all assured that it goes through user testing. Can you walk us through how that works? Because, I mean, I think a lot of us kind of envisage that you invite people into the office and you have them play with prototypes, but how does that process work from going from a design that goes through testing to then ultimately going through to implementation?
So we're very lucky at Canonical in that we've got a full-time user research and testing department that's headed by Charlie. And we make it's a brilliant resource to have as a designer, and we make a lot of use of that. So we do testing at many different stages. When we have initial concepts and wireframes, we do early testing, sometimes even before things have reached the stage of visual design. We put those together into prototypes. We do more early testing then, and it's an iterative process. So we do testing, we find out what works, we find out what doesn't work. We take that feedback, we incorporate it into a design, and we retest. And iteration is really the key to good design, and that goes all the way up the process. So we do benchmark testing as well, that happens every 3 to 6 months, where we run through the same set of tests against the whole platform, and this gives us the top level view of, are we trending up, are we trending down,
right,
are we resolving the issues.
And how do you choose who you test with? Because I mean, one of the criticisms that we've received in the past from some facets of the community is that Ubuntu is quote-unquote dumbing down Linux, which is a position that blows my mind, because computers should be simple and accessible to everybody, but there is a concern sometimes that we're almost taking too much customization or flexibility away from the system. How do you balance out people such as my mum and dad, who are novices, with experts?
I wouldn't say that experts don't appreciate having a clear, easy-to-use interface where everything just works, everything's where they need it to be, and they can focus on getting work done.
Right.
Look at OS X, for example.
Right.
Apple have been very clear about this, and they're the leaders for creative professionals, and these are the people with very, very complex workflows,
right,
creating very, very, very in-depth content. So one of our really important core user bases is developers, sysadmins, those kind of very technically minded users. So when we're doing user testing, the two areas that we focus on is the areas, the target markets that are given to us by product management and sales, but we always make sure that we're equally testing on some of what we consider kind of our core user base, which is the technically minded developer user.
And let's talk a little bit about the way the design team works with the community. We've seen, as I mentioned earlier on, a lot of work on our app developer community, and we've seen a really nice design community flourishing around that. The core applications, the calendar, the clock, the calendar, things like that. There's been a lot of input from the design team, but there's also a great desire for the community to be driving those applications forward. How do you guys engage with the community, and what can the community do to help you guys be successful, and what do you feel like you can do to help the community be successful?
Yeah, I mean, just one thing to say to start off is, I think, what the change we've seen in the community over the last year and a half moving towards apps is absolutely brilliant, especially from a design point of view. There's a very strong opportunity for people to use Ubuntu as something they can build on top of to create great experiences. And good design does necessitate a bit of dictatorship. It does need strong leadership. Design by committee has
never really worked, right?
It hasn't worked. It's got a bad reputation that's entirely justified. And design requires this kind of high bandwidth interaction between individuals, and it requires people really to take ownership and to be able to hold at an architecture level, have the key people holding that whole architectural vision and that whole architectural roadmap, and to be able to coordinate the design via that. This is very hard to do on something like the shell, because the shell is massively complex. There's a roadmap across all of the different elements. There's cross interactions between the different elements. So it needs kind of there are probably about 4 or 5 key people we have which hold that knowledge in their brain.
Right.
But apps are a brilliant opportunity, because with apps we can enable community members to really take that full responsibility for the app.
Right.
And so then there's a shifting in roles. So our role at that point is to support the community, to provide pattern documentation, to provide feedback, to do reviews, but really having that core ownership of those community projects 100% owned by the community.
It seems to be very much in the spirit of Ubuntu, is that we're trying to provide the building blocks that people can, the Lego bricks, as I mentioned earlier on, that people can use to build interesting apps and content. Like we have the SDK, and with the core apps, we have people like Alan Pope and Michael and other people who have been working to help the community be successful. But fundamentally, all of those apps are driven by the community, right? The code is driven by the community, the design is being done. And it sounds like you talk about the design pattern documentation. Is that the philosophy here, is that you want to provide the best possible tool, so all of that thinking that happens in the design team can be very crisply articulated out to people in the community, so community designers can...
Exactly, that's the objective.
Right. Now, going back to the nature of how design works, I've got a couple of quick questions that I'm interested in here, which is, for many, many years, there's been a lot of study into interaction design and how we can build slick and elegant user interfaces. And there's almost, it feels like the design world feels like there's a magic recipe that you can hit on, where if you place all of these different pieces in the right place at the right order, somehow it unlocks our brains so computers become really easy to use. Like, how do you balance the variance in how our brains work and how we interpret the world and the experience that we've got with creating a consistent user experience?
So I think a lot of design is going back to starting off by going back to the first principles of what are we trying to achieve. So first of all, thinking about what do we want to enable the user to do? What's the user's objectives? What gives value to the user?
Right.
What will a user like? And then once we've got that around the subject area, then doing research, looking at what prior knowledge, what experiences do people have, At some point we commission research, so Charlene and her team go into people's homes and do studies and look at how they perform tasks and interact with technology.
Right.
And there's a lot, that's before we've even started thinking about the designs. There's a lot of preparation and really understanding what we're trying to do and what will give value to people and how we can fit into people's lives. Then once we've got that, and we start thinking about architecture and different ideas. So then we go into kind of, I hate the word, but ideation. And it's the worst word in the world. But that's what it is, going out and really, sketching out a lot of different concepts, a lot of different ideas, and then pulling that back together and trying to define kind of values from that, rules from that. And a lot of design, you have to get the prior steps right first. So you have a clean architecture, understand, what are the different continuums, what are the values behind it. And once you've kind of distilled that architecture down, and then you start, iterating through wireframes for some things, iterating through prototypes for other things. And then eventually after lots more iterations, user testing, more design iterations, more user testing, slowly kind of you're painting starting with very coarse brushes and moving up to finer brushes. Then at some point you actually start implementation. And implementation you're still learning, that's still design. You're now painting with a finer brush and you're always discovering more things.
So it's almost like art that's driven by science and testing and empirical evidence, right? It sounds like what you're saying is you have this creativity and this perception of how you can build something, but then it's got to be driven by results, right?
Yeah, and it's iteration that really creates great designs. I mean, in the engineering world, agile has been, is well accepted as probably the most efficient way and the best way to go and develop software. In the design world, we've got something called UCD, which is user-centered design, which is basically agile design.
Right.
The idea is you do a bit of design, you test the design, and then you take feedback and you incorporate it into the design.
Gotcha.
And the more iterations you can do, the better things will get. So this just on that. This is one of the reasons why I love working at Canonical and working on Ubuntu, because it is a long-term project. It's not a project you just go out into the woods, you hunt it down, and then you move on to doing something else. It's something you kind of live, breathe, and work with for.
It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Right?
It is, and a process of continual improvement. And I think only through that process of learning and continuous iteration improvement can you produce something that's really great.
And how do you balance? We had this conversation a little bit yesterday. We're at the sprint, and there's a bunch of us working together, and we had a session yesterday about new areas of design and ideas, some ideas that you guys are playing around with right now. How do you balance kind of moving the paradigm of how we use computers forward with the last 35 years of what we know? Like, we have this traditional window, mouse-driven, this WIMP interface.
I haven't heard that term.
I know, it's been a while. Sorry about that. I showed my age a little bit now. But how do
takes me back to Riscos.
How do you balance that with trying to move us forward as people in how we interact with devices?
So people's kind of preconditioning and understanding of how the world should work and how computers should work is very important. So first of all, pick your battles. You can't, humans are naturally, and we're very resistant to change as creatures, whatever the change is, whether it's the recipe of something we buy from the supermarket changing, or the supermarket putting something on a different shelf. Or Windows
buttons is one such example.
Exactly. Also whenever working on kind of an internal IT project, changing an internal IT system, there is always a lot of resistance, a lot of difficulty around change. So I think the first thing is pick the battles. You can't change everything at once. That's not going to work. That's not going to be a good experience. So decide, where your bullets are best spent in terms of change.
Right. Gotcha.
First of all, obviously, producing a good design, doing usability testing is important. But even if you have a design, through usability testing, you've done longitudinal studies, people are going to adapt to it and evolve with it, and it's going to work in the end. You're still going to hit that resistance barrier. So then there's a lot of things we can do. You look at the initial learning curve. You try and put more hinting, more signposting in to kind of lower that learning curve.
But it's like you said earlier on.
These changes gradually.
It's like you said earlier on. It's a long vision, right? It's a long-term view of how things work. So just wrapping up, final question for you. Speaking of the long-term view, what can our users expect in the next year? Like, I mean, in terms of the thinking, in terms of the design, where you're going. We're obviously working on the phone and the tablet. The desktop is, start to think about the desktop. Just give everybody a little bit of input on what they can expect to see. So
I'm going to go back to the past first. So we put a lot of effort into, a lot of our focus for a long time was on the desktop with Unity 7. So coming up we've got 1404, that's the swan song, that'll be the ultimate release of the Unity 7 design and code path. And then from Unity 7 we had an idea of how everything was going to work on the desktop. But as we had been doing that, we'd been thinking, okay, how's this going to apply on the phone? How's this going to apply on the tablet? But with Unity 8 and the phone and the tablet, we've been actually putting that into practice and trying to take all that learning and all that design from Unity 7, move it into a phone and tablet, into a touch environment. So the next step from here is then to take that and then go back to the desktop. That's not purely just a kind of a one-year task. That's a larger task. I think that's the next direction. In the next year, we're going to see a lot of refinement around the phone and the tablet, and I hope that in a year's time we'll have a really spot-on phone and tablet experience.
Brilliant. Well, John, thanks very much, and hopefully we'll have some more interviews from this week. So stay tuned.
Cheers. Thank you.